Well, thanks to taking a heavy dose of nostalgia, we are given a much deeper look at the character of Will Reeves in what is easily Watchmen's strongest episode yet.
Don't change the channel, don't touch that dial. We got it all on UHF. Take off your sneakers.
Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Watchmen Season 1, Episode 6, This Extraordinary Being, and holy shit, what an episode this truly was. Look guys, last week I was raving about how great the episode of Mr. Robot was. This week, I haven't seen the Mr. Robot episode yet, so maybe it's still, I'm sure it's still amazing and things like that, but, this week, it's Watchmen. Watchmen is the standout show that I'm going to be gushing about, because holy fuck did I love this episode. This, to me, just continues to show just how much of a mastercraft Damon Lindelof is. When he puts his all into something, and when he just really just doubles down on his creativity and his weirdness, but also with him focusing on one individual character, it just makes the whole show so much better. And considering what we know now, if this is where Watchmen is headed, this could go in the direction of The Leftovers and become maybe not as good, because I don't think anything will ever be as good as The Leftovers, at least for me. That's my favorite show of all time. But it's going in the direction that I wanted to, and it's just getting better and better every single week. There was so much to love about this episode, so much to talk about, and definitely a lot to dissect here. And this is yet another episode of television that I think is a lot of people are going to be talking about from here on out, because essentially this episode was an origin story, but a very different kind of one than what you're used to, but we're just going to jump into it right now. So, look, I think we knew eventually we were gonna get something like this, considering how much, how little we knew about, Will, and how much of him was just shrouded in mysticism and things like that. There was just so much we didn't know about this character, but I was not expecting them to do a complete deep dive into him like they did here, and I'm so glad that they did, because Will might have just become the best character of this entire show. I said Wade was my favorite character last week. No, after this week's episode, I think Will might be the best character. I just really loved what they ended up doing with him here, because we go all the way back to like I believe it was like the 40s or something like that, and Will, he's in the police academy, and just seeing what he has to go through, the struggles that he's had to endure, not just because of all of the racial stuff, because definitely that's a very prevalent part of this episode, but especially his PTSD. We can see that he has very much been changed by the Tulsa massacre. He's never really been the same since then. This has always been something that's affected him. He frequently harkens back to it, and especially the scene where, he's first introduced to his wife, and he's talking to her about, like, what he went through, and him recounting these events to her. You can just really see how this has affected him in that way, but it's also something that he can't let go of. He will have visions of his mother, or he'll be thinking about the movie that he was watching, and even though, yes, these were harrowing times, it's the only memory he has left of his family in that way, and that's what makes it so devastating. Like, he obviously loves his family, but the only memory he really has left of them is them being in that Tulsa massacre, and them letting him survive in that way. And I just really love that we got to see just how deeply affected he really was from this. We knew obviously there was definitely something that, we know definitely that he was affected by it, but we hadn't really gotten to see that full effect until now. And I just gotta say now, Javon Adipo, I've always loved him as an actor. Even in things, obviously Leftovers, things like that, but even Overlord last year, I thought he was phenomenal. This was easily the best work I've ever seen from him. I thought he just completely killed it in this episode, really just representing just how much trauma Will is going through, but also just the anger in him. This is a man that has so much internal anger that is built up inside of him, and he's finally finding this creative outlet, but it doesn't change things for him. It actually makes things worse, and I think Adipo just did such a great job getting you to sympathize with this character, but also getting you to understand this character quite a lot more. And now scenes with Louis Gossett Jr., they play out a lot differently than they did at first. You know, at first it seemed like he was headed in like a villainous direction, but now it very much seems like this is sort of a revenge sort of thing for him. And of course, we're going to get into it, but my God, that he just killed it in this episode and was easily one of the best things about it for sure. I mean, there's a lot to really love about it, but Adipo, I just think, completely commanded the entire episode. And even though, yes, we did see some of Angela, this really was his episode in that way. He was the main actor here, and he just completely killed it. And I really hope that the Emmys have a good sense in them to give him a nomination for Best Guest Star, because he really just completely doubled down on everything that this character was going through. Like I said, the hardships he had to endure, and it's very hard for any actor to pull off, and the fact that Adipo was able to do it, I was just so impressed by. He was absolutely remarkable here. But of course, let's just get into it. So yeah, this entire episode basically functions as an origin story, not just for Will, but how he did in fact become the Hooded Justice. And I know this was something that a lot of people predicted, but honestly, I feel like it was the best possible path for this character, and it makes the most sense for this character. And especially you consider, I mean, the way he's treated throughout this episode, nobody really gives Will that respect that he really does need. I mean, yes, he is warned about, you know, certain things that he has to be, you know, wary of and all that kind of stuff. Especially this being known as Cyclops, you know, he's constantly told throughout this episode that, like, he needs to be wary of that. But aside from maybe his wife, who even she kind of ends up turning on him towards the end, and of course the character of Captain Metropolis, you know, Nelson Gardner, nobody really gives this guy the respect, especially when it comes to Glenn Flesher, who, I mean, holy shit, look, this guy is such a fantastic actor, but I really think he works best in roles like this that are small, and that he does have a big part in, but that he's not, like, you know, this episode, of course, he's the main villain, but, like, he's not the main character of the show or anything. But these are the kind of roles that he just completely relishes in, these vile, just terrible human beings, and he does such a great job in making you just completely hate Fred. I mean, this is a guy who just really hates black people, and you can tell he's incredibly racist. He is very blunt with the way that he treats Will, and, you know, throughout the episode, you just really want to see Will get his revenge on him, and I think they did a really good job with setting that up, and that conflict between the two, I thought, was so well represented throughout the entire episode, and eventually, you know, he does kind of get his revenge, and so seeing Will kind of don the Hooded Justice as a sign of revenge, but especially the way that he was treated amongst the public, not just Fred, but also the police department. I mean, they don't even really respect him. There's, of course, that scene where he ends up basically forcibly being hanged and all that stuff. I mean, it's really brutal, but I like that this episode really did shine a light on that stuff, because it gives us more context as to the kind of person that Will is, what he's really been through. Yes, he's had to do some really harsh things. Yes, he has, in fact, killed a lot of people. Yes, he has become this vigilante, and yes, he's done some really brutal killings, but it's all been purposeful. It's all been an exercise of revenge in that way, and it's all been to kind of find an outlet to channel that anger that he has, and kind of get that, you know, justice for his parents and them being killed in that Tulsa massacre. And it just really made you care for Will as a character, and I think they did an excellent job with that here. The other thing that was very interesting, though, about this episode is how it really showed how alone Will really was in all of this, because while the Minutemen were around at this time, they didn't really do a lot to help out Will. They were very big talkers in that way. They knew about all the systemic and racial problems going on, but they didn't really want to do much to fix it. And that's why Will, while he got done what he needed to as Hooded Justice, he didn't really get to make his, you know, that's why Will didn't really get to have that rewarding sort of feeling from all of this. Like, yes, he got to kill Fred. Yes, he got to kill all these other people, but he never really had anyone supporting him in that way. And that's what's so tragic about this whole thing, is that although Will had a family, that family didn't really support what he was doing. Neither did any, but especially not either did the Minutemen. They weren't really into this whole idea. They weren't really true to their word in that way. And I thought that was a very interesting idea. It did a good job of not ruining the Watchmen lore, but just seeing it from a different perspective. And in Will's perspective, these guys are not very helpful. These guys didn't really want to practice what they preach in that way. And I thought that was a very interesting way of looking at it for sure. But it also says a lot about our society. I mean, we turn a blind eye to a lot of this stuff. There are many people out there that are actively trying to stop racial tensions and trying to stop all of these societal things, but they don't actually do anything to do that. They just kind of talk about it. They are aware that it's a problem, but they don't actually want to do anything to fix it. And that very much applies to the Minutemen here. And that's, again, what's so startlingly real about this episode. That's one of the reasons why this episode hit as hard as it did, is that it is very topical in that way. It's one of those many things that I think is still very much the case today, unfortunately. And I hate saying that because you want to believe that we're past it, but I think still today there are many people who, and they're no better than the ones that are, you know, basically committing these atrocities and are the perpetrators of these terrible race crimes. And that's something we very much did see with the Minutemen here, that they're more concerned about just the big, flashier villains. They don't really care about the other threats that are going on, the bigger threats that are, corrupting their society in that way and that are doing all of these terrible things. Will actually does care about that stuff. And just seeing that Will was someone that was willing to stop all this stuff, again, it's very topical in the way, and I think the show did a really great job with shedding light on that. But then also seeing how things like these police, forcing him to hang himself, gives us a lot more context now into Crawford's death, I thought was very effective, because up till this point, they very much categorized Will as someone who was a villain, as someone who was on the wrong side of things, and now we see that this was basically him kind of getting justice for it all. That even though, yes, Judd might have just had this clan room for his father, which is his defense, that, oh, his father had it, which I could be wrong, but were they trying to imply that Fred was possibly related to Judd? I mean, it very much seemed like that's what they were trying to do. But basically getting to see, Will force Judd to hang himself, similar to the way that those cops once did to him, was a very effective moment. And considering what we had seen Will been through, him having to do that, him now having to become Hooded Justice, it just gave us so much more context into his character. It made us care so much more about him, and I think they did a really great job with that. But I also was not expecting to get this answer this early on. I thought this would be something that wouldn't really be revealed till like the penultimate episode, but now that it's out of the way, I like where the season is now going, because it changes the whole narrative. No longer is this about how, oh, was Crawford involved with, something deeper? Was he connected to, like, the Cavalry or something like that? Which, I mean, he still could very well be. He still could be connected to the 7th Cavalry, and we didn't know. But we know that Will did this not because of his involvement, but because of the fact that he had that KKK robe, and it sparked these traumatic memories, and it made him want to, take his aggression out, and there really is no justification in his head for, why someone would have that robe, even if it was just their relatives. That's not good enough for Will, and I think that's something this episode showed us very well. Will is a man who is very much a man of his word in that way. He has a very strict code, and if anyone does something to deviate from that, and if anyone does something that is harmful to that, he will easily take them out, and it definitely provokes a lot of interesting questions for what exactly Will is planning moving forward. I'm not entirely sure what it's all about, but I have to assume it has to do with bringing down the 7th Cavalry, because we know now he's definitely not involved with that. I think it definitely has to do with something there, but we still don't know what that's really all about. I guess we'll just have to see, and that's really going to be the big story as the rest of the season goes on moving forward. It's no longer a murder mystery. Now it's more about the aftermath of all of that. And oh my god, just the scenes of Hooded Justice, who is such a badass, especially that, like, one take, which I'm pretty sure was a one-take scene of him, you know, walking around that, like, convenience store or whatever, and shooting up all of those, you know, and just shooting anyone that gets in his way and trying to get to, you know, Fred, and eventually finally bringing Fred to justice was just such a effective but also such a rewarding scene. They did such a great job of making us care for this character, but also just really showing what he had been through, and I really love the way they did that. But also the plan that the Cyclops had is also very fascinating. His plan essentially was that he was going to try to start this race war of sorts, where he would just have black people fight each other. They're not going to focus on the ones that are actually committing it. He's going to, like, you know, hypnotize them into believing that their race is a problem. And this is something that, again, we still hear about today. We still hear about race wars that are ongoing and things like that. And it's a very interesting subject. It's a very interesting thing to tackle, and I think the show did a really, really good job with that for sure. Again, he gets a lot done as Hooded Justice. He's still able to, you know, stop Cyclops and, you know, burn that whole sort of warehouse to the ground. Such an amazing scene in that way. But still, he didn't have anyone that was with him in that way. He didn't have anyone supporting him, and it just shows how alone he is in that way. They also tried to not necessarily show that Will was a good guy for doing this. It very much did bring out his worst tendencies. I mean, it completely destroyed his family in that way. You know, he and June, as much as June was very patient, who I have to say, the actress who played June, I thought was also incredible. I thought they did such a great job with her, and even though we didn't really see a lot of things through her point of view, we still had a lot of insight into what she was going through, how she was trying to root for Will. She was trying to do what she can to be patient, but you could tell that she was not for this. She was not for this life of crime that he was into. She was not for the fact that he was becoming this mass vigilante, and especially the effect it was having on their marriage, and even on their son, who was, like, inspired by his father. And the moment where she's telling him that, you know, she wants nothing to do with him and she wants him to go away, it's just absolutely devastating. Not just because of the fact that he clearly was closeted, and that was something that he never told her, because we know, obviously, that him and Nelson had this one-night stand, and I thought they did a really good job with saying that up, too, with the whole intro to Hooded Justice in American Hero story. Not really seeming like it was going to serve much of a purpose, but now seeing that this was actually true, that what we're seeing in American Hero story is actually fairly accurate to who Will is. It's just a more, like, over-exaggerated version of it. And I think that's very interesting as well. And again, it was just really tragic to behold, to see Will go through all of this, considering that a lot of this wasn't really his fault. It was just that he had this anger, he needed to channel it in a way, or else it was going to get the best of him, so he became this mass vigilante, but that only made things worse. Yes, he was able to bring down those that caused him harm, and bring down those that may have, you know, been affiliated with the people that killed his family, but it destroyed his in turn, and it was just very devastating to watch, and I think they did a really great job with that for sure. So, aside from all of the Will stuff, which I really think I've covered pretty much everything that this character went through, let's talk about the other part of this episode. So, when we're not focusing on Will, we are focusing on Angela, taking this very lethal dose of nostalgia, and I love the way that this was done, that we're with her throughout this entire thing, even though we're seeing it as, you know, a flashback and presented that way. The whole thing really is through the eyes of Angela. We don't get to see, like, Cal and Lady True and, you know, Lori and all of them trying to save her until Angela is conscious to see that. And those few glimpses that we get, it's very interesting, because now it kind of feels like Lady True might not be the bad guy here. Maybe Lady True is on the right side of things, because we know that Lady True was involved with nostalgia. Like, she worked for the company, she was the owner of the company that made the nostalgia drug, and I think that's a very interesting idea. I don't really know where that's all gonna go. But the way the episode ends with you seeing that the thing that brings Angela back is this woman that seemed like she adopted her, because we know that Angela didn't really know her parents all that well. She's had adoptive parents throughout most of her life. So seeing this woman who, like, who found her and things like that, I'm very interested in seeing where that's going to go. It seems like next week we're going to get a lot more into Angela's past, what she's really been through. And there's stuff we know for sure, but there's still a lot that is very unknown about Angela. We know that her and Cal met in Vietnam. We know that she was a police officer, but because of the wounds that were inflicted on her because of White Knight, she unfortunately had to step down. But other than that, and we know she had a relationship with Crawford and all that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff we still don't know about her, and I like the way this episode, even though it was focusing on Will, is giving us a brief glimpse into what the next episode might entail, that we're going to focus more on Angela, and that's the way that she's able to recover from this, because remember, she took someone else's nostalgia, and that's not what it was meant for. That's what people made it into, and it kind of reminds you of the effect that, say, that what they say about certain drugs today, like when you're on acid or something like that, and, you're taking a very lethal dose of it, and even though, yes, this is a fictitious drug, Laurie's conversation to Angela and her telling her why this was so bad feels eerily similar to why people on the news say that certain drugs are bad, or why politicians will say certain drugs are bad, and not focus on the things that are good about it. I mean, the good thing now is that Angela has a much deeper understanding of Will, the kind of person that he was, what he really did go through, what caused him to, also made it known that he did, in fact, kill Crawford. He was not lying about that. So she knows that she can trust him in the way, but we also know that Will is about to do something that is going to destroy her, that whatever he has planned, he knows it's something where she's not going to want to talk to him again. She's not going to be able to trust him anymore. So we don't know what that's all about, but now that we know more about Will, it really gets us more interested in what this plan could be. What is him and Lady True really involved in? I'm very interested in seeing what's going on here, but also, how does he feel about the public opinion of Hooded Justice? Because Hooded Justice, as everyone knows him, is on American Hero Story, and we don't really know how Will feels about that show yet, and I'm kind of interested in if they get more into that, because to my knowledge, Hooded Justice was not something that was revealed in the comics. This is something that the show is finally revealing after all these years, and now that we have an answer now, I'm excited to see where they really do go with that, where all of that can really take the show moving forward. Going back to Will, this also, I think, has a really good parallel with how Angela goes about things and how Will goes about things. Both of these guys have can-do attitudes. Both of them are doing whatever they can to try to bring down this problematic element of their society and this threat to their society that nobody else wants to stop and that nobody else is really willing to do anything about. And we've seen before that Angela is similar to Will, where she will go to extremely violent and almost cruel, unnecessarily cruel lengths to stop those involved with the 7th Cavalry, going as far as to torture some guy even if he's not really involved. If she feels he's affiliated, then he's guilty in that way. And that's similar to Will, where, like, anyone that is affiliated, even if they just have a row because, their father, might have been involved with the KKK, just because they're affiliated, that's enough a reason for him to bring them down. And so it showed a very good parallel between those two and show why they have that great relation to each other. Besides of their familiar ties, it really does show the similarities between the two in a way we didn't really see before, and I really love getting to see that here. So with all the story stuff out of the way, let's get into the technical stuff for this episode, because holy shit, where do I even begin? I mean, the directing here is just top-notch from the directing here I just thought was phenomenal. I really loved the way this episode was directed. It felt very different from the rest of the show. It had a very sort of noir feel. It was also far darker. I mean, the other episodes were dark for sure, but This episode really felt like it could have been ripped out of the 1940s in that way, and I think they did a very good job with that, and that's something that I really did appreciate. I just thought Stephen Williams' directing was just so great here. You can tell that he really does care about the subject, but I really do attribute all of that to Damon Lindelof. I mean, this had his name written all over it in that way, and it's easily, I think, some of his finest work to date, and it just reminded me of the best episodes of The Leftovers. The best episodes of The Leftovers are the ones that would go in very weird directions, and the ones that would be very introspective hours of, a character study, and that's exactly what this was. This episode was a character study in that way, but it also was Lindelof's attempt to start a dialogue about racial tension and how stuff like that does still happen today. Even though, yes, it's maybe, it's different from the way it was done in the 40s, what we see in this episode, sadly, is still very topical. What Will has had to go through all of his life, there's still things like that happen today, and maybe even worse than what happened then. And again, it's stuff that we don't really like to think about, but I love the fact that Lindelof is opening our eyes to that. But again, the way that he chose to view this episode through Angela's eyes, and how, often we would see, like, Cal or someone like that trying to jog her memory back, and it would always revert back to the 30s. Probably my favorite instance of this is when we would hear Cal talking about how the president was Redford, but because Angela was so deep into the nostalgia, we also saw, she heard that it was, FDR who was president at the time, because he was president then. And I thought that was just a really cool sort of motif, what he would do there, little things like that. I just thought worked so well. And the writing here was just so excellent in that way. It made Will such a richer character, maybe the richest we've had so far. And it makes me very excited to see where the rest of the show is really going to go moving forward. And I think he just did such a great job with that overall. The cinematography, though, I mean, it was just absolutely gorgeous. I adored the cinematography in this episode. The choice to have the entire thing in black and white is a very risky one, because you are very much isolating your audience in a way. There's a lot of people that don't like to watch things in black and white, but I love the fact that it was like that, because it felt like it needed to be in black and white. It felt like we wouldn't have gotten the same sort of, we wouldn't have gotten the same impact if this wasn't in black and white, because it very much felt like something that could have been ripped from the 1940s in that way. And I really did appreciate the cinematography here, but what I loved even more about it, not just the one-track shot, which I already mentioned, I thought was incredible the way that was done. I love that one-take scene, and any scene involving Hooded Justice interrogating someone or, attacking them, I thought were just absolutely masterfully handled. But what I loved even more were the brief glimpses of color we would get. Whenever Will saw something in color, it was a memory, but it was a happy memory. It wasn't a sad memory in that way. It was something of his parents. It was a memory of a movie he used to watch with them, and him, remembering this movie where the black mayor is celebrated, something that just wasn't really true at the time. Or something where his mother would play the piano and he always has this recurring melody in his head. Things like that I thought were just so brilliantly done, and I thought was just an absolute work of art in that way. I absolutely love the cinematography in this episode, but also the score. The choice to have most of this episode kind of, scale back on Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score, which it was used every so often, especially in flashbacks with the Tulsa Massacre. We would hear that every so often, that little piano that we heard in the first episode, we heard that again here. But a lot of this episode relied on music from the time, and it just made you fit right in there. It made it work so well, particularly, and I could be wrong about this, but it seemed like to me most of it was from the same artist. I don't know if all of it was from, I don't know if all of it was from this band, the Ink Spots. I don't know if it was all from them, but it seemed like it was. I mean, a lot of the score, a lot of the music seemed like it was from the same artist, and I'm not entirely sure what that was all about, but it worked perfectly, and I loved the music that was used here, and it's one of those soundtracks where, like, if it was available, I'd download it instantly, because I really love the music that was used here for sure, and the editing. I thought this episode was perfectly paced, and just, again, the way when it would choose to go back to, seeing Angela and them trying to get her to, you know, recover from this and trying to get the drug to wear off, and seeing how it would become more and more drastic in that way, I thought was so well done. And again, just everything about this episode was so masterful. Moving forward, like I said, I don't really know where we're going to go. Obviously, Lady True seems like she's going to have to find a way to get Angela to recover from this, and I don't exactly know what the recovery process is going to be, but it seems like it's going to be something very grueling. It seems like it's going to get Angela to reflect on a lot of her childhood, which, again, we don't know a lot about, and that's something I'm very excited to get into, but also get her to, I think, you know, form a deeper bond with Will, because the last time she saw him, she was very resentful. She wasn't really trusting of what he said and just didn't really want to get close to him. But now that she knows more of what he's been through, I think she's going to be a little bit more understanding. I think she's going to be a little bit more willing to open up in that way. I think she's going to have that willingness to connect to him more. And I'm excited to see where that really does go. But again, we also know that he's planning something, and we don't exactly know what that something's about. I would assume it has to do with something with him as Hooded Justice, though, and I'm not entirely sure where all of that is headed. But overall, this was just such a masterfully done episode. Between the excellent use of the 40s setting, the black and white, Siobhan Adipo's just absolutely stunning performance, the way this episode focused on the struggles of PTSD, trying to hold in anger, toxic masculinity, drug addiction. I mean, this episode just nailed all of that perfectly. It is an absolute standout for this show. It's one of the best TV episodes that I have seen all year by far, and I am absolutely going to give this episode of Watchmen, Season 1, Episode 6, The Extraordinary Being, overall in A+. Look, I know I've praised Damon Lindelof constantly on this channel, but I mean, this episode just really reminded me why I adore him as much as I do. Just such a distinct style, so brilliantly realized, such compelling characters, and I just can't wait to see where the rest of the season really does go. It truly is getting better and better every single week, and I know a lot of people keep having this stupid complaint of, oh, the show's too woke, and oh, it has these political themes, but trust me, I think this episode very much shows, like, there's a purpose to it all. There definitely is a purpose there. They're not just, like, shoving in commentary. There's a very, very clear purpose, as there's always been in Watchmen, because Watchmen's always been about reflecting on the politics of today. And that's something they've done incredibly well here. But this episode very much does show, I think, where they're headed moving forward. And I'm just very excited to see where it all does go. But that's it for my review of this episode of Watchmen. Let me know what you guys saw this episode overall. Left your thoughts in it. We'll see you guys in my next video. And we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.